What is going on, my DIY haunters? Today I wanted to show you how to do a really cool prop. Doesn't take a whole lot, just a little bit of finesse, a little bit of artistry, but it'll come out really cool. So occasionally I'll go to the thrift store, Goodwill, and I'll come across something that really catches my eye. This time I happened to catch a pair of these cool crosses. Kind of similar to what you'd see on an altar, but you know, I've done these in the past and I thought, hey, that would be really cool if I could show these guys how to take a quarter skull that I cast, fuse it to the cross. We're going to blend this whole thing into the cross, so it's going to look like it's just oozing and it had been melted on there. It's going to look really cool in the end, so I want to teach you how to do that, so let's go. Okay, so first things first. We're going to discuss the skull because I feel there's a lot of important factors that go into this thing before we even get to fusing it with the cross and get that far along. So I want to talk a little bit about how these are created. If you're not familiar with two-part rigid foam, it's an A and a B compound that when you mix them in equal parts, they have a chemical reaction and they expand, very similar to great stuff foam that you'd find at Home Depot or Lowe's. In this instance, I only cast what I call a quarter skull. Quarter because it's only a half back without the bottom mandible or jaw. So in order to do that, I just pour a quarter portion, and I'll show you in another video how we pour this to cast an actual skull. But I pour a quarter portion of each, A and B, and that gives me just enough to create this little half section here. Now, if you're not familiar with Nightmare Makers, which mostly everybody is, but in case you're not, she provides molds such as this. She's got a variety of sizes and styles. I always use a number 6. A number 6 mold is actually a full skull with an open mouth. This is a closed mouth, and I believe this is a number 5. But for most of my works that you'll see, I use the number 6 only because I like the open skull look. Sometimes I'll detach the lower jaw, manipulate it, reattach it, and make it look a little bit different. So going back to this now, there's several things that I do to this that I prep before I even start the corpsing. One of them being the teeth, you know, because with foam is foam, it's going to expand. But when you pull this from the mold, you're going to notice that the teeth are kind of fused, right? Because it's just foam. So you've got just a lot of connection points through here. And what you want to do is break those points up because we're trying to go for a realistic look here. So what I like to do is I'll come between each tooth. Let me show you close. I'll come between each tooth and I'll score and make each tooth look like an individual tooth. Meaning, so I'll go in here and scrape all the way around. I'll break up each tooth. And then I'll go in with another tool. I happen to have some clay sculpting tools, and these work great. This one has just a little beveled spoon edge. But what I'll do is I'll go in here, and once I've done that with the X-Acto knife, I'll go between each tooth, and I'll just kind of clear all the gunk out that I was scoring. And once that is done, and you've gone over the whole mouth, I mean, you're a dentist here, basically. You want to go up into the gums, and you want to push up, right? Because what you want to do is create like a cavity that the teeth are actually sitting in, just like a real gum line. You want those teeth to look like they're seated inside that gum. So you want to break up that foam. Let me see if I can get that closer so you can see it. But you want to get this and push up into that gum line all the way on every tooth, so that when you're done, if you look at this, those teeth look individual. They're no longer joined together by sections of foam. And that's important because what we're going to end up doing here, we're going to dead blacken all of this. And you want that black ink or paint, whatever we're going to use, to seat all in those cracks. I mean, you want it just to sink in because it's going to be a base coat for the top layer of paint that we're going to end up putting on this. It's going to give it more depth. So once we're done with the teeth, what I'll do is I'll go around the bone line of the nose, the eye ridges here, and I'll just I'll get an X-Acto knife sometimes. And it's different on every skull. Like I said, it just depends on the look I'm going for. But I'll go into the bone line and I'll chisel out little cracks, you know, little indentions, just like if it was a real skull, just an aged skull, just cracking from time. You know, you can go in there and score any of this stuff here. But mainly just the bone lines because we are eventually going to cover this with latex. So a lot of that detail will get covered, but not on the bone line. Bone line and the gums. Once we get that paint seated in there and we're ready to go on the corpsing, the latex, once we paint on latex around the gum line, probably a few layers here, once it dries, apply some more, we can actually go in here and push up on the latex. And what it's going to do is, it hardens or starts to cure, we can go ahead and just roll it up with our fingers, and it's going to creep up like actual skin. So it's going to look really cool by the time we're done. Okay, so let's discuss my particular Corpsey method for this piece here. Fortunately, this is a smaller piece, so it's not going to take nearly as long to complete, which is good because, you know, the bigger the skull, the more drying time you need. You know, some people like to use paper towels and glue, paper towels and latex they now use. What I do is pretty much cover this thing in a base layer of latex. We're going to hit it with a heat gun. You know, typically people like to let their stuff dry. I've found over the years that, especially with a thin layer of latex, you can use the heat gun, go over it, you know, probably for about 4 or 5 minutes, and that stuff is going to get just tacky enough where it's not going to be super sticky and pulling off anymore. Then you can go over, do some more layering, whatever you need to do, and so forth, and just keep blow drying it with a heat gun, and you'll be good to go. And really, by the time we're done with this, I would say within an hour, the whole piece will be dry. So what we're going to do on this particular piece, as I said, you know, I use chipping brushes. Chipping brushes from any paint store, Home Depot, Lowe's. These are about $1.25 now for a wide one, and you can get the thinner ones that are half the size, sometimes for 98 cents. Just depends on the pricing. But we'll get latex, and I'm going to brush over the entire piece, even the teeth, because remember what I said, we're going to go over the teeth, and we're going to roll that latex up as it dries, layer after layer, and it's going to get really gummy, and it's going to look like loose skin. But that's what we're going to do, even in the eye sockets and in the nose. So let's get that. I'm going to do a time lapse real quick. Okay, so we have our first layer of mass latex. Now what I'm going to do now is go over it with the heat gun. Like I said, we're going to go over a few passes, maybe for a few minutes, until the latex is not, you know, tacky anymore or coming off. Shouldn't take that long. Let's get to it. Okay, so we've gone over this with the first pass of the heat gun, and like I said, you know, once you do it enough and it's not tacky anymore or coming off on your fingers, you're good to go. Now, obviously, in the eye sockets, there's probably still a little damp, probably some thicker areas of latex that aren't as dry, but that's okay. And the teeth, like I mentioned, we've got that first layer of latex, but what we want to do is go over it with another one before we start to try to roll it up. So even when we do that, we're going to go over it again. Like I said, we want to do like 3 passes of latex over the teeth. That's going to give us a good foundation and base to push those gum lines up and make it look really sticky and gummy. So let's do that really quick. Okay, so we've gotten the third pass of the latex. It's no longer sticky. We are going to be able to roll this up now. So what I need you to do, grab your skull, put 2 fingers on the front teeth, and just start pushing that soft latex up. And it'll feel like it's going to start to rip on you, but that's fine. Because remember, we've already scored those teeth underneath, so all you're going to do is expose the teeth that we've already scored. What we're doing is pushing this latex up above the gum line, or actually right above the teeth, under the gum line, and it's going to make it look like actual gum skin tissue. So let me do this real quick, and then I'm going to show you here what kind of look we're going for. And, you know, feel free to do this a few more times if you'd like. It just depends on how much skin look you're going for and how much actual gore and detail you want once it's all finished with. But if you look, side view, see the latex is rolled up, and that's going to look really cool once we start blending the rest of this in with some cotton. And you want to do this step before we blacken it, because basically we're going to drop black paint, ink, or stain in there and let it settle into the cracks. Next is where we start adding depth, depth with color. So what we're going to do is using a flat black spray paint, we're going to go ahead and darken the eye sockets, the nose cavity, the palate, temple areas, and then we're going to kind of just lightly frost over the front of the skull here. And that's going to start to create the depth that we're going to need to start building more texture on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this outside, do what I need to do, and when I come back, I will show you the step that we need to be at, and then we will go from there. Okay, so here's the initial frosted skull. As I mentioned, I did the eye sockets, nose, palate, temple areas, and then I went ahead and flipped it upside down and did the underside of the cheekbone areas. So as you can see, we're already starting to get a sense of depth on this piece here. So the next step is going to be the teeth. Sometimes I'll go ahead and spray paint these all black, but as I said, over experience and over years of doing this, I find different ways to do things that work a little bit better than before. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take black ink, and I use just a standard airbrush ink or India ink, whichever you can find, and we want to get a brush and we want to go ahead and paint in all those crevices around the teeth that we carved out initially. Get in there real deep, all up underneath the gum lines. Don't be afraid to get ink all up underneath that gum. Okay, and then once that's done, we're going to take a stain. This one is called Provincial. Sometimes I use Espresso, whichever color I could find at the time, but they both work just as well. The reason I put stain over the ink is because the ink is water-based. It'll get in there and give me that initial color depth. Then I need to go in and seal it with a darker color. Since the stain is oil-based, I'll get that on there. We'll wipe off the excess, and then we'll hit it with a heat gun and kind of cure that. So let me get that done. Let me put this down. I'm going to grab a brush, and I'll give you an example of how we're doing this. So let's get a brush. You want to dip that in the black ink like I mentioned, and go ahead and start just going in there and going through the cracks. This will take you just a little bit of time, but you don't have to be, too careful with it. Just get in there. Let's just brush those teeth. And don't worry about, oh my gosh, I'm painting all the teeth black. That's fine, because we're going to wipe off this excess before we apply the ink. I'm sorry, the stain. But we want to make sure that we get into all these cracks, and if it takes coating that whole tooth to do it, then that's what we do. So let's just keep doing this all the way around. Okay, so we are almost there. So as you can see, I've got ink all up in there. So let's go ahead and wipe that off on the top layer here. Now, when you wipe this ink off, it may or may not want to all come off, and that's fine. Sometimes it really depends on the skinning of the two-part foam. Sometimes it's really glossy and things roll right off it, and sometimes it just wants to stick to it because it's so porous. In this instance, it looks like the majority of the ink is wanting to stick to the teeth, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter. We're going to paint them anyway. The important thing is that we've got the black seated all up in those gum lines and in between the teeth. So as you can see, that's all done. So let's take the same brush and wipe that off. Go ahead and dip it in the stain. And we want to get up in there just the same way as we did the ink. Get up under the gum line. Go ahead and just paint those entire teeth up. And like I said, don't be scared to get it up on that gummy latex that we did up underneath the gum line there. Okay, once we got that done. Okay. You can see that that glossy stain is now all up in there. So let's just go ahead and take that, wipe the excess off. Okay, and then when we're left here is all the teeth coated first in ink and now in stain. And again, it may not look so pretty right now, but in the final stages, once we go to actually detailing this thing, that base layer is done and we got a good coat to work with. You know, I just realized that I didn't have my other my other light on. Sorry about that. So hopefully you'll be able to see just a little bit better here on this step. So what I'm going to focus on next is the nasal cavity. With this, I just pretty much go straight in with the stain. No need for the ink on this one. And we're just going to kind of haphazardly just start to dot in the color inside this cavity here. And as you can see, the more we do, the more depth we're adding to this little piece here. And as you can see, I mean, it's looking pretty good as it is already. So after we get this done, just take your towel and just kind of gently just blotch it, so just ever so gently like that. Okay, so before we can start the corpsing process, what we need to do is go ahead and get this attached to the cross so that we can start working both pieces as one. And in order to do that, you've got two options here. Get your cross. You can either use your regular expanding foam. Since this is already two-part foam, I mean, foam to foam is going to stick within a matter of minutes once it starts curing. But you can put some foam here, set your skull in there, walk away for a while, let it start to cure and attach to the skull. Or the way I'm going to do it, turn that cross over. I'm going to pilot a couple of holes back here, attach that skull, and I'm going to screw into the back of here just so I can start working quickly, because I really don't want to wait for the foam to cure to start doing what I need to do. So let me get my drill, get me some screws, show you what we're going to do. So is this looking cool already or what? Okay, but we're not done. This thing needs to look really super sinister, so you've got to look past what you see here and imagine something else. We're going to take some foil. We're going to extend these tips, right? Because I want this cross to stick out. This doesn't look very sinister just yet. What we're going to do is take expanding foam. We're going to come around and start filling in all these gaps. Once that's done, I'm going to apply some more to the back because I want this cross to look like it just grew up into the skull. Once that's done, more expanding foam down here. We're going to start to stretch it as it cures. Stretch it all the way down. You probably won't even be able to see most of this by the time we're done. But let me get the foam. We're going to start the process. Now, the thing about expanding foam is it expands, right? So you've got to use this very gingerly when you're applying it, because you don't want to go and just spraying, because that stuff is going to go like this, and that's not what you want. So I get a lot of questions about how do you really work that foam? How do you get it to bead up so small? Well, it's just applying very tiny amounts, right? In certain locations. Again, it's the same thing as spray paint. You don't want to just go spray paint in one spot too long because it's going to bleed everywhere, and that's not what you want. So if you get an expanding foam, make sure you get one that has the nozzle where you can turn it off, turn it on, because if not, foam will keep coming out and it's hard to keep that clean. And once that cures in there, forget it. You've just trashed this whole can. So this can will last you a little bit longer. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is start applying the foam that I mentioned back in these back crevices and back cracks. And once that's done, we're going to start working our way up to the front. So I'm going to put it on a time lapse, let you see what's going on, and I'll get back with you once we get to that spot. All right, so you can see what I've done here. I've gone around like I mentioned. I went ahead and used Great Stuff foam, sealed all around the back sides and the crevices where you could see the gap between the cross and the skull. That's already starting to expand. And what we need to do, grab you some plastic forks, grab you a box of them because you'll go through a lot of them, or you can use popsicle sticks, whichever you like. You're going to let that cure, but you also want to go ahead and start just kind of working that in there. And in this state right here, it's still very tacky, so it's going to collapse on you. And that's fine because we're going to be adding some more to this anyway. But all we really want to do is get a good foundation here for the other foam to start to stick to as it starts to cure. Okay, so just like that. Just kind of pack it down, all in the little crevices there. Okay, I'm going to hit this with a heat gun. Really just regular air works, but I find that the heat gun, as long as you don't put it too close, it'll start to cure that a little bit more quickly than standard air. So what I've done is apply the foam to the back of the cross, like I said. It looks kind of funky now, but that's fine because as it expands, starts to cure, we're going to start to drag that with a fork, right? We're going to start blending it into the skull until it looks decent. And then we're probably going to go back and add some more because we want to build this up enough to where it looks like it's actually part of the skull, not just a piece of foam stuck to the back of a cross. So we're going to give this a few minutes. Once it starts to cure and I play with it and I see that it's starting to stretch, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So when I say tacky, this is exactly what I mean. You want it to look like cheese. You see how it's pulling off like melted cheese? That's what the look we're going for. And again, I know this looks like a hot mess right now, but that's fine because we're going to actually add some more so that we can stretch it and build up the layer. But in the end, that's kind of the look we want to go for. It's going to be a stringy looking hot mess, but when we go to paint it, add some cotton and latex, it's going to look out of sight. So let me keep doing this. I'm going to keep messing with it. I'll come back to you here in a second and I'll show you what the full-blown mess looks like. Okay, so here's where we're at. Now, again, I've worked this over, so it's going to look a little bit different than you're probably expecting. But as you can see, the foam has been stretched, beaded all the way around. It almost looks like dripping candle wax, and that's kind of the look we're going for. So the thing about foam is, like I said earlier, there's really an artistry to working with any medium. Foam is no different. You just have to learn how to work with it. And it takes a little bit because you have to get used to the curing time, know exactly when it is that you can start stretching it, and just how to form it all the way around to get that look that you're going for. So once this dries completely, what we're going to do is I'm going to start the corpsing process on the skull so that I can blend that with the foam that I've started to drag over to the skull. Now I do that to make this seamless, right? Like it's creeping over the entire skull. So when it's all said and done, it's going to look pretty cool. Now, what I will also do, everywhere you see foam, I'm going to cover that in mask latex. I'm simply going to get a brush. We're going to brush it on, and that's going to give it a skin texture, so it doesn't look just like foam. And then once all that is said and done, we will hit it over with spray paint, come in with some more color, and then I'm going to add these tips that I told you with aluminum foil. Now, aluminum foil is kind of a DIY trade secret. It's great for doing fingers and other forms, and then you seal that in whatever other medium, plastic, cotton, creepy cloth, whatever you have, to finalize your form there. But again, once we're completely done with this, it's going to look really cool. So once your piece is all dried, it's no longer tacky, and you can move it around your hand and work with it. We're going to set that down, and this is the fun part. This is where everybody goes crazy, right? It's the cotton and latex method. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit it with the 3M spray adhesive in certain spots. I'm going to start with the top of the head, and I'm going to just put a light coat of adhesive, and then you get that cotton ball, and you just want to start dabbing. And you'll notice as you start dabbing over the adhesive that it starts leaving cotton behind, and that's what we want, because when we go back over that with latex, we want that to blend all that together. And we're going to take it all the way down, especially to the gum line that I talked about earlier. And what I like to do is I kind of like to leave the eye socket and cheekbones kind of protruding, so I try not to hit that too much with texture because I like that bone look to come through. And then I'll work my way down to the lower mouth area. Granted, even though we have foam here, I still want to get some cotton on here and texture that and go back over it with latex. And once you're done, you're going to see that the piece looks pretty amazing. It'll look even better once it's all painted. So I'm going to set this down. I'm going to do a speed demo on it, and then we'll come back at the end of that. So I've got this guy pretty much where I want him. We've hit the whole thing with latex, cotton. I think we got skin where we need skin. The only thing I noticed that I still need to do, I'm going to use some creepy cloth and just put some fragments from the cheekbone down to here. We'll cover that in latex. What that'll do is give that a drapey skin effect also, while giving another sense of texture. Once we are done with that, I'm going to go ahead and blacken out those eye sockets again, because through the course of latex and cotton, it starts to get a little dull. We just want to freshen that up before we go any further. Once we are done with that stage, we're going to go ahead and add the tips, the foil tips I told you about. I'll hit that with cotton and latex, blend that into the actual skull piece, and then we're going to do a final paint and texture. And then lastly, we're going to add the eyes, and we're calling this thing a done deal. Okay, got one light shut off so we can actually see some depth going on here. So I went in, like I said, added the creepy cloth from the lower cheekbone all the way down to the pedestal here. Went in and added some foil tips, and I'm going to leave some of the cross exposed because you want this thing to look like it's just turning into something sinister from what it originally was. Okay, so what I'm going to do from here with these foil tips, I'm going to go ahead and spray some adhesive, get some cotton, go all on that, and go ahead and wrap these completely in latex as well so that I can blend this in together once I paint it. Okay, getting really excited here. So I went ahead and took the piece, did a light coat of flat black all over, darkened the eye sockets, all the way around, all the way down to the base, right? So right now it kind of resembles a stone-like look. Don't know if you can tell that in the video here, but in person it almost looks like the whole thing's made of stone. But we're not done yet. So my next step is to go ahead and start adding more depth. I'm going to use the stain in a cotton ball. I'm going to start dabbing in areas like under the eye sockets, the nasal cavity, under the palate area. And we want to darken that all the way down here because what you want is like almost like an evil bleed that it's doing. And then once we're done with that, we're going to go in, we're going to spot check just a few more areas up in here. We're going to move over to the eye sockets. Final last stage is going to be polyurethane in those teeth and anything else that we want to give a wet look to. And then that's going to complete it. It's going to be a done deal. It's going to be really exciting. Hope y'all like it. Okay, so here's where we're at with this. And as you can see, this thing is coming together really quickly. When you start adding depth and shadows, I mean, it just starts to pop. Really like the way this is coming out. And you know, when I talk about putting emotion or feeling into the works you're doing, this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? So right now I'm in the mindset of sinister vibes. I've got all these images in my head of what I envision this thing looking like, and it's coming to light. This is exactly what I was looking for. So what's left to do now? We're going to work on the eyes, get hit with the polyurethane, and it's going to be really cryptic, really creepy. So let's get started on the eyes, finalize this thing, and call it done. So when we're talking about creating eyes, you know, there's a lot of different options you can go with. You can go with the acrylic eyes that they sell on eBay and Etsy, but you know, those tend to look more like doll eyes, not kind of the look I'm going for. You can use glass beads that they sell at Hobby Lobby or any other craft store. That's still not the look I'm going for. What I choose to use is Sculpey. Now this is a polymer clay, usually cured in an oven, but for our purposes, I can cure it with a heat gun just to a state where it's still malleable, but not tacky and loose. So what I'll do is just take just a tiny bit, and what we're gonna do is, you know, and actually it helps if you get stain on your hands, and if you don't, grab a little stain, put it on there, start working it, because you don't want this thing to be bright white. Even though we're gonna paint it, you want it to be kind of a dirty color to kind of match the work that we're dealing with. So I'll just grab some stain off this cotton ball and just kind of work it into the putty. Yeah, so, and it really depends on, like I said, what kind of eyes you're looking for, whether you want round eyes, slanted eyes, cat eyes. For me, I like the dead eye look. And so what that entails is just getting a little ball, kind of flatten it out into an oval shape. And again, you know, if you get stain embedded in it, the clay gets to be dirty, and that's fine. So, and then you just kind of dry fit, you know, where it is, where you want these things. And let me get this other one going here real quick. And while I'm doing this, I really appreciate y'all hanging out with me. I hope that y'all have a great Thanksgiving. It's been pretty fun tagging along with y'all through this kind of process. And, you know, like I said, I hope to continue to grow, do some other really cool videos for y'all. And hopefully, that, you know, this is the kind of stuff y'all want to learn about and learn how to do. You know, and again, like I said, this is nothing that nobody else is doing. It's just that I have a certain style and technique that I think make the works I do, you know, kind of a signature look. Let's see here. And so once you get those eyes in there, we're going to kind of push them in. And this isn't the completed state because we still have to go in there and build that up. But we want to backfill those sockets, okay? Because what we're going to do at this point, we're going to come in with some bleed putty. I call it bleed putty because we're going to put it at the base of that eyeball, and it's going to look like, you know, like skin that's dribbling out, or kind of the eyes dribbling out of there. Okay, so when I said backfill the eyes, that entailed putting some putty in there, building it up with a little bit more of the Sculpey, and then I put that the bleed clay that I said, which goes right around the eye sockets. And that, you know, that acts as that little gooey buffer that's between the eye and the socket. So once you get that in there, you need to get you one of these tools, just kind of spread it around the bulb of the eye on both sides until you work it in there and it looks good. Go ahead and get you some stain. Go around that eyeball, and you want to go over that clay, over that bleed clay. Okay, so that you got your eyeballs just popping out. And once we're done with that, I'm going to hit it with a heat gun now, and that's going to give it that semi-firm state, not taggy, not gooey, but not rock hard either. So I've hit this with a heat gun. The eyes are firm. They're no longer... Let me tell you something real quick. So on Sculpey, it's got a certain translucency to it. Once you cure it, or once it's semi-cured, it loses that translucent state and becomes more of a solid. So that's when you know you're good to go. So once I'm to that point, and if you can see, you know, like I said, I had stain wrapped in my fingers. So you actually have an eerie looking eye already as it goes. So, but we're gonna do, I'm gonna take some white paint. I'm gonna do a light glaze over these eyes, and then I'm gonna kind of rub it. But I just wanna give it a little more of a deadly, you know, whitish look, but not so bright white, not so dead gray either. So we're gonna take care of that real quick. Let's get you a little bit. Here you can just use a regular, a little bit of acrylic paint. Really, we're just kind of making a wash. So just kind of dab your brush in there. And then we're gonna just kind of go over these eyeballs just a little bit. Don't actually even have to do the whole thing because we're gonna do a wash on it, like I said. And the polyurethane is gonna act as our wash. It's what's gonna dilute this. Okay, so I've got those kind of a little glazed over. Let's get to our polyurethane. And the polyurethane I use is a water-based polyurethane. So it looks white. So when you put it on, it's gonna turn like this funky bluish purple color, which actually looks pretty cool, but it ends up drying clear. So, and I just use the same paintbrush. And then go over those, I'm gonna go over those eyeballs, kind of spread that paint around with the polyurethane. Again, these eyeballs look bright right now, but that polyurethane is gonna dry clear. So a lot of that will go away once it finally does its final cure. Let's see real quick here. Okay, so we got the glaze over the eyes. What I can do now is hit it with a heat gun, speed up that process, and hopefully, you know, we may have to go over it with another coat. But while we're waiting to do that, let's go ahead and hit those teeth. Get this polyurethane all over those teeth. And like I said, don't freak out. You know, your teeth are going to change color here, but once it dries, they'll go back to their state, just only wet looking. And I am going to do this, like I said, everywhere where I wanted wetness to look, all the way down, because that's just how I roll. Everywhere where the liquid would drip, because I actually have stain drippings, which was to mimic, you know, like blood. And, you know, like I said, I don't like blood and gore. To me, it just makes everything look cheap. It's effective for some things, but not for what I do. That would completely change the state of all of my works. So underneath the eye sockets usually is a good spot. Drip it all up in there. And then on that drapey skin that we had going across there, let's hit that. And I may actually go inside the eye sockets right here, just under the eyeballs. Okay. All right. So you can see this thing really looks like a movie piece. I mean, it's come to life super clear, more than from when we first started. Okay, so let me hit this with a heat gun. See if we can get some of that bluish color from the polyurethane to go away. Okay, that's probably about as good as I'm gonna get it for now. And one final thing I think I would like to do, because those dead gray eyes look cool, but I think I'd like to add a dot to the middle of it. Just a second, let me grab a black paint real quick. I'm an artist, so I've got everything, right? Look at all these colors. Okay, so let's grab the black. Just a tiny little dab, because all I am going for are pupils right now. Now I have a plethora of brushes, but again, since I'm heavy into art, I tend to drop a lot of money on paintbrushes. So I'm going to use my fine tip brush. You just want to dab that black. I mean, this brush is probably the same as a less than a felt tip pen in thickness. Okay, I'm going to put a little pupil. Nothing major, but enough to make it look kind of creepy. I'll show you here in just a second. Let me just get in here. So you can see a lot of the stuff I do. I mean, it's not just slapping on paint, as I always say. I mean, there's a lot of detail into everything that I do, all the way down to the painting. So for that fact, I don't really call everything I do props. I like to refer to them as displays, because they really are one-of-a-kind works of art to me. Alrighty, I think we're about done here. So, I don't know if you can see that, but it gives it a very eerie look, right? I don't even know if I want to put this on my mantle tonight. But anyway, so that, my friends, is pretty much the transformation of the skull to altar cross, my version anyway. Again, you know, I've got another cross. I was going to make a pair of these, but for demo purposes, I'm only creating one for now. This was quite a lengthy process. I mean, the whole video, between breaks and everything, this piece probably took me about 3.5, 4 hours to do. Not that bad, but again, if you're trying to create one-of-a-kind, cool-looking, sinister works, that's just the nature of the beast. That's the time you got to put into it. So again, really enjoyed it. I hope y'all like it. Who knows, this may be a giveaway here pretty soon, but we will catch you later. And again, have a great Thanksgiving. We'll catch you later.